Welcome to the 2020-2021 Lakeland School Corporation Communications Training. This will give you an introduction of 4 major policies and a review of communications overall. Last spring, a number of policies were adopted prior to our shutting down in March. And so this training will outline your responsibilities as an employee of Lakeland School Corporation at the start of this school year, and will also provide you information on communication in the corporation overall. We'll be discussing 4 new policies. Specific guidelines for each will be summarized for you. If you'd like to read the full text of these policies, you can find them at the link given at the bottom of this slide, where you can click on Bylaws and Policies and read the full text of these 4 policies or any other policy adopted by the corporation. So let's start with staff use of personal communication devices. Employees and school officials are permitted to use a corporation-owned or personally owned personal communication device. These are devices that make and receive calls, send and receive emails, send and receive texts, and send and receive instant messages. And we'll be focusing on communications that concern corporation business and also touch on personal communications as well. So what's a PCD? Whether it's corporation owned or your own device, PCDs include, but are not limited to, computers, tablets, e-readers, smartphones, mobile devices, really any device that helps you communicate back and forth with someone. All employees are expected to archive communications involving corporation business. This is a new protocol. Luckily, most of our corporation communications happen through corporation email, and those are archived already. So these would be things like text messages or instant messages. You will be required to make sure those are archived and available for download if needed. And we'll talk about when that is necessary here in a moment. Also, this is pretty typical protocol now, but a part of this policy. You are asked to refrain from using PCDs while driving as part of your work duties, and really at any time. You may take calls using only hands-free technology, and your call should be very short in duration. Ideally, you should pull over to the side of the road to take a longer call, or avoid taking a call until you are out of your vehicle. Obviously, no use of PCDs is allowed while we are transporting students. Since communications about students may constitute educational records, they have to be archived. We've gone from the day of having lots of paper documentation to now having digital documentation. Often this information is subject to litigation, so we have to keep track of it in the corporation. When you leave the corporation, either through retirement or taking another position elsewhere, all archived items have to be transferred to the corporation, and you'll have to sign off that what you have provided is complete and that these items are removed from your possession. Similarly, if you remain employed but are looking to get rid of a personally owned PCD, whether it's upgrading to a new phone or maybe passing on a laptop to a student going off to school, information has to be removed from those by the corporation. And once again, you have to sign off that you have passed on any archived information to the corporation. Our technology department will help with all that, and so you'll get that information as needed. If your PCD is lost, stolen, has any kind of unauthorized access, you must notify the superintendent's office immediately so we can deal with any lost information. This is probably good protocol anyway, but now policy prohibits us from maintaining the following types of information on our cell phones: social security numbers, driver's license numbers, credit and debit card information, financial account numbers, and any information that can identify students. Any confidential information on any PCD must be encrypted. If your job role requires you to have information that is to be encrypted, you will be notified and technology will help you with that. So if you have any of this type of information currently on your cell phone, please remove it. You are also now required by policy to lock and password protect your PCDs when they are not in use. So again, for example, if your cell phone does not have a lock with a key code that you have to enter to get back into it, or a fingerprint that unlocks your phone, please do that now. You should not use your PCDs to record audio or images, especially in locations and situations where a reasonable expectation of personal privacy exists. Sounds like common sense, but we have it in policy. We like to offer our employees as much freedom as possible to use their devices as needed, but do note that excessive use of a PCD may result in disciplinary action. Obviously, we all have a job to do, and if using our PCDs is getting in the way of that, that could be a problem. We are all also responsible for any kind of theft, loss, damage, or misuse of our PCDs. The school corporation and the board assumes no responsibility for that. And any use of a PCD that violates any local, state, or federal law can result in disciplinary action up to and including termination. Moving on to web content, apps, and services. All web content that we host on our servers must comply with state and federal law. Some of those laws and acts are listed there for you, and we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail later. Obviously, our web content reflects the professional image and the brand of the corporation, its employees, and its students, so it's very important that, one, we follow all laws and everything presented is acceptable. Very simply, the goal of our web content should be to educate, inform, and communicate. So those three things should drive all that we do when we post anything on corporation web spaces. There are a number of items that we are prohibited from putting on our web services, apps, and any content that we have out there. Items supporting or opposing a candidate for public office is not allowed. Any investigation, prosecution, or recall of a public official, or the passage of a tax levy or bond issue, for example, a referendum, would not be allowed on our website. Links to any website of other organizations that promote the same thing are not allowed, and communicating information supporting or opposing labor organizations or actions are not allowed either. Staff members are not allowed to create web content, apps, or services to post student progress reports, grades, class assignments, or any other class material. We have corporation-specified learning management systems that should be used for this. So Schoology is our new learning management system, and that's where that information should be housed, with grades and other information housed in PowerSchool. Similarly, since you're not allowed to create those spaces, students should not be required to go to any personal web pages or sites to check on grades, obtain assignments, materials, or to turn in assignments. Web content created for classroom use should be hosted on the corporation's server. This happens very rarely, but any items that are posted should not be password protected unless there's restricted access. That doesn't happen very often again. Parent permission is necessary for a student to be identified online. Every year, parents fill out permission forms related to that when they register. And so it's always a good idea to check with the front office to see whether parents have denied permission for students to be identified. Superintendent and Director of Technology are required by the board to pre-approve apps and web services used to support student learning. So you've noticed that we've already kicked up getting staff feedback on the apps that we use or any web services that we purchase, not only to provide a standardization, but also to utilize our funding and be as consistent as possible and be as efficient as possible. Moving on to staff technology, acceptable use, and safety. The corporation's computer network and internet system are not a public access service or a public forum. So the board does create some reasonable restrictions to be consistent with what we are about, and that's education. So any policies that apply to corporation devices also apply to PCDs that are connected to the corporation network. So if you are connecting to the network using your personal device, all those policies apply. You're prohibited from engaging in actions that are illegal, personal attacks, anything related to that. Again, very common sense pieces that are officially stated in policy. We do, once again, have to follow federal laws and have measures to protect our students online, and we'll be talking about SEPA here shortly. There are times when the superintendent or director of technology may temporarily or permanently unblock access to websites. Usually this is related to a specific project that's going on. We've done this in the past and will continue to do so in the future if it is for educational purposes. As you know, staff goes through lots of professional development, mandated trainings throughout the school year, especially at the start of the school year like now. So introduction of policies such as this, reminding you what you can and cannot do regarding communication, and also informing our students of a lot of the measures that are included in here are part of our annual training. So as long as we are communicating online and in person, there will be policies that we review on an annual basis to keep you up to speed. Our board definitely respects your First Amendment rights, but remember that your rights do not include a permission to post inflammatory comments that could compromise the corporation's mission, undermine staff relationships, or cause a disruption to the school environment. So your conduct online, whether it is during the school day or at home off school property, is important and may have unintended consequences if you do not follow appropriate protocols. If you disregard policies related to this, your privileges may be suspended or revoked, and disciplinary action may be taken against them. You are personally liable, both civilly and criminally, for misuse of technology. Most importantly, state and federal laws regarding confidentiality when it comes to students and employees is crucial. So once again, posting any personally identifiable information is prohibited. Moving on to social media. Social media is all around us. We use it as a school corporation to communicate. The communications related to the school corporation are considered limited public forums, and they are monitored for being on topic and following the rules of the forum. So you may or may not have noticed that occasionally, if inappropriate comments are made on any of our social media pages, they are taken down, and we have the right to do so. Each corporation provides social media statements that specify the purposes and limits to access, so people know what they can and can't post, or hopefully understand that. Users are personally responsible for the content of their posts. Staff, also including our approved volunteers, may, with the permission of the principal, use social media platforms for classroom instruction or school-sponsored activities. When this happens, these are considered an educational activity and not a limited public forum. So the intent is that you are posting what's happening in a classroom or showing a project that is happening, not intending for anyone to get into any kind of dialogue about that. It is just for informational purposes. Once again, we can't post anything related to students if we do not have parent permission to do so. Staff members and corporation approved volunteers must obtain parental consent for students to participate in the use of social media platforms and sites. This is new. A form will be provided for you to use with parents. For example, a coach has a Facebook page for the team where information is shared about practices, variety of different things. If a parent refuses to provide consent for their child to use that site, the staff member must arrange for alternative methods of communication for the student to continue participating. So this is a new part of what we need to do, and a form will be provided for you to get that information from parents. We expect all of our employees and anyone working with us to conduct themselves in a respectful, courteous, and professional manner on social media. Obviously, we expect the same from students, parents, and the general public. However, we are the role models and have to set the tone for that. Once again, just listing a number of things that our sites cannot contain. A lot of common sense pieces here. Obviously, we can't promote anything obscene or illegal. And anyone who contributes to that, staff or students, will be subject to disciplinary action. Similarly to using your PCDs to access your personal email, You also have the right to access your social media for personal use during work hours, as long as it doesn't interfere with your job performance. We're not going to stop you from checking your Facebook page on your birthday to see how many people wished you a happy birthday. But again, if it becomes excessive, that may be a problem, and the corporation may monitor your use. Everything's kind of an open forum, so things come to our attention and we do have to follow up on that. So if you misuse corporation technology or our services, once again, disciplinary action can take place, and hopefully there aren't any illegal actions going on, but if there are, those will be turned into the appropriate law enforcement agencies. So lots of information presented here related to policies, what some of this stuff mean. First Amendment, obviously we're talking about communications and our right to be able to speak publicly, but with freedom comes responsibility. So once again, we'll outline some things that you have to keep in mind. Let's talk about student speech. There are two types of student speech. Pure student speech, basically our students have the right to say what they think, as long as they are not going against the norms that we set. We set certain standards. We have consequences when those standards are not met or are violated. But basically, students are allowed to express their opinions during school as long as it's not infringing on the right of anyone else. Students are allowed to speak on. There's also school-sponsored speech. So this is a little bit more formal. Student publications like student newspapers, yearbooks, formal speeches. Those get a little bit more adult scrutiny because they project the image of the school and the student is speaking on behalf of the school at that point. When it comes to employee speech, a little similar. There is speech on matters of public concern. As a citizen, I have the right to address my concerns about an issue that's going on in town, for example. I have the freedom to write a letter to the editor to state my opinion, as long as that is not interfering with our school system or my workplace relations. I am free to do that. When it crosses over into that, it gets a little dicey. Speech on matters of personal interest, which is where the editorial may cross over. If I'm airing a personal grievance that may go against the school system or my workplace relations, this type of speech may result in termination without violating my First Amendment rights. So we do have to be careful on how we air our grievances and what is said, especially if it becomes libelous or slanderous. And then finally, employees may engage in government speech. Employees may speak as an employee representing the employer through a regulated message. So you may be asked to speak on behalf of all employees at Lakeland to talk about how wonderful it is to work here and what we're doing and particular programs we have. And we do that a lot. You may be asked to speak at a group as a representative of the corporation. So that would be considered government speech as an employee. Private citizen speech, we all fall under this. There are some things that are just not protected by the First Amendment. Obscenity, incitements of violence, defamation, forms of hate speech, and threats are not protected no matter what your employment status is. We've heard a lot about FERPA. When you sign on as a new employee at Lakeland, you get a more detailed training on this, but it's a good time to review what the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act is. So the Department of Ed has a brief video that really summarizes it nicely. So let's take a second and take a listen.
The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, is a federal law which applies to educational institutions and agencies, such as schools, school districts, colleges, and universities, to which funds have been available under any program administered by the Secretary of Education. The purpose of FERPA is to protect the privacy of parents and students with regard to education records under Section 444 of the General Education Provisions Act as amended.
Wow, it's easy to get confused with all that legal language. Let's try that again in plain English. The truth is, data about us is everywhere. It's collected when we shop, take a vacation, look at a web page, or send an email. You see, FERPA is a federal law that applies to most schools, colleges, and universities. It's meant to protect all that identifiable information about students in records that are kept by schools, and it provides the right for you to access that information, to seek to correct it, and generally to consent to its disclosure. Let's take a closer look at what that means. Today is Patrick's first day of kindergarten, As Patrick moves through the education system, his schools accumulate data, such as his grades, learning disabilities, or special needs information, and disciplinary information. As Patrick takes tests to see how he's progressing, his scores are protected by FERPA. FERPA requires schools and state and local educational agencies to keep the information that came from Patrick's records private and get his parents' written consent before sharing it with anyone else. There are some exceptions, but the general rule is Patrick's records are confidential. Students don't attend school anonymously, so schools routinely share some basic information about students, called directory information. If a school is going to share directory information, it must notify parents and students who are 18 or over or who attend post-secondary institutions. For example, Patrick's school yearbook contains his name, grade level, and photograph. That's okay because his school designated these items as directory information and published its policy on its website, and Patrick's parents haven't opted out. FERPA also requires schools provide Patrick's parents the ability to review his records to make sure they are accurate. Patrick's applying to college. He and his parents review his high school transcript and discover the school has gotten Patrick confused with another student who has lower grades. This isn't good. FERPA not only gives his parents the right to see the records, but also to request that the school correct mistakes. If Patrick's parents and the school disagree on the accuracy of the info, FERPA gives Patrick's parents the right to request a hearing. Colleges and universities are also required to protect student information under FERPA, but the rules change a bit. Meet Lisa, a high school graduate who is headed off to college. Hooray! While Lisa was in elementary, middle, and high school and under the age of 18, FERPA allowed her parents access to her education records. Now, Lisa is entering college, and her FERPA rights transfer from her parents to her. Her parents wonder, but wait a minute, I'm paying the bills here, and now I can't see how she's doing academically? Since Lisa's parents claim her as a dependent on their federal tax return, her parents can still see her education records if Lisa's college chooses to release them. FERPA doesn't require schools to release records, it only allows this. You may be wondering, how do I find out more about how FERPA affects me or my child? To start, look for your school or school district's FERPA policy on its website, or ask your principal or school administrative staff about your rights under FERPA. Visit the Department of Education's Family Policy Compliance Office website for answers to frequently asked questions on privacy, training, and guidance for parents and students on FERPA rights and protections.
So what is directory information at Lakeland School Corporation? If you look under that particular policy that they referred to, directory information is a student's name, grade level, participation in officially recognized activities and sports, height and weight if they're a member of an athletic team, dates of attendance, date of graduation, type of diploma awarded, awards received, honor rolls, and or scholarships. So a lot of things that you'll see posted either on a program for an award ceremony or a program for an athletic event. Those are basic directory information pieces that you'll see at Lakeland. So Section 504 was mentioned here. You may associate that with a student learning plan, but Section 504 goes deeper and it actually prohibits discrimination based on disability by federal agencies. So that is the guidance that we have to make sure our websites are accessible to all parties needing to access them. So that falls under the website information. You saw SEPA mentioned. SEPA is the Children's Internet Protection Act, and it was enacted in the year 2000 to address concerns about children's access to obscene or harmful content. That's why we have filters, suspicious search reports that we get on a daily basis, and policies in place to keep students and staff safe. COPPA was mentioned also. The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act was enacted by Congress a couple years before SEPA, and that is to limit the collection of personally identifiable information from youngsters without their parents' consent. So the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, monitors services and sites to make sure that operators know they are collecting information from children under the age of 13. So what do you have to remember from all of this? So we'll give you a review incorporating the corporation's overall expectations that were outlined last year that align with all of this. Who to ask for help as part of information you'll be getting in training. You'll get a listing of who is responsible for what areas of the corporation as a reference for you. But as always, you can reach out to the corporation office or the technology office, and they can help answer some of your questions related to these things. So if we use our corporation expectations as a guide, we listed these 4 at the start of last school year. Number 1 was lead with positive intent. Actually, that one's been around for a couple years. If you stick with positive comments and expectations, you're going to be okay. If you're limiting the negative commentary that you put out there, usually that is what gets people in trouble. So stay positive in your comments and expectations. 2, know your role. You support the learning environment of our students, no matter what your job duty is in the corporation, by maintaining confidentiality, promoting safety, and leading by good example. Again, focusing on that positivity piece takes you a long way. Number 3, be a conscientious risk taker. Obviously, there are more restrictions being put on how we communicate and what we communicate, but that does not stop us from communicating in a professional manner. We do want you reaching out to parents and communicating with parents, but know that there are limits to those communications. Sharing only the important information that you should with students under your care. So make sure you communicate in a professional manner while continuing to communicate. And then finally, know yourself. What do you need to help yourself remember to follow some of these new and old guidelines? Put some supports in place for yourself. So if you know you're going to forget to password protect your cell phone, make yourself a note right now and do it right after this training. A review of just some of the information that again you've seen before. Before we kind of focused on the verbal piece, so remembering to zip your lip sometimes, but also remember communication is also digital. So not only are we talking about verbal communication, we're also talking about any kind of communication that comes off of your fingertips. When it comes to student information, grades, educational plans, behavior, health, discipline details, those are all confidential information. This information is off limits to anyone but those custodial parents, and only if it is your job to share that information with them. So you may not be the one who should be communicating that to parents. It may be the classroom teacher or the resource teacher, not necessarily anyone else. Parents and guardians can share with anyone. They can say anything about their kids and what they've done with anyone they want to. It is not your job to do that. Employee information is similar. Any information regarding evaluations, disciplinary actions, behavior, or health, this information is off limits for discussion. Employee can share with anyone, you cannot. As far as religious or political commentary, as public employees, we can neither promote nor discriminate against religious or political beliefs. So there's nothing wrong with answering a student if they ask you what church you go to, but it is not your job to promote that church as the better or worse church to go to. Negative public commentary. There are just some days where we hate everything, but it's not our job to make that public commentary. So comments about your job, about your employer, about your coworkers. Negative commentary can lead to termination due to slander, libel, or creation of a hostile working environment. So just like mom always said, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it. Communicating with students. Remember, we're communicating verbally, but we're also communicating with our fingers when we are using digital communications. So Schoology is our learning platform. Remember, our goal online is to educate, inform, and communicate. You will be getting more information at building level, but basics that will be expected in Schoology is a daily agenda, a learning expectation. In one building, they may be calling that I can statements. In another building, they may be calling that power standards. But what you are expecting students to learn will be part of what is expected to be posted. And since we have this wonderful use of technology, and we will be doing virtual and in-house teaching, some video or auditory support as part of what you are doing is important as well. Communications with apps. Remember, we highlighted you must have parent consent. That is new. You must have an alternate method if no consent is given, and you will have forms available to you to help make that happen. Don't forget to mind your PCDs. If you keep it business only, you archive any information that is not in our email system, you password protect, you remember to do things like shut down your device or put it to sleep mode each night if you leave it behind in your room or your office. If you lose it, please report it. If you need to replace it, notify us so we can get the information off of it. And remember that it is your responsibility to keep it and its information safe. Don't forget that we recreate Lakeland School Corporation every day with our words and actions. We are professionals. We love the students we serve. We respect those we work for and with. We create the best environment in which to educate and prepare all our students for career and life success. If we remember that we exhibit these beliefs through our words, whether they're verbal or online, and our actions, live and online, every day, we'll do wonderful things. Thanks for listening, and I hope you learned something.